Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 270. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. The sponsor of the show is Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com. Promo code PEACE. They'll save you 20% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. And so it's a great way to help yourself live a healthier, more productive lifestyle, and at the same time help out your favorite podcast. They have everything CBD wise that you could want at Paloma Verde. My favorite products are, of course, as listeners of the show know, the topicals. But if you ever have a lot of stress going on, a little bit more anxiety, the gummies are absolutely excellent. One or two of those just helps you feel a little bit more mellow, a little bit more easier going, and even helps you get to sleep at night. So they have tons of products at Paloma Verde, but check out the website, Paloma Verde cbd.com, and then use the promo code PEACE. Again, that'll save you 20%, and it will get the show a kickback. Now, you could share the show from the Libertarian Institute, but I actually want to start off talking about today's show by mentioning that I got banned from Facebook. No reason given at all, just an email saying that it was determined I had violated the community standards. I could submit an appeal. I didn't really have anything to submit an appeal on. I just said I wanted an appeal. They requested a picture of my ID. I sent them one. They requested a second picture of my ID, sent them another one. And so now they say that they'll determine sometime in the next 30 days. And when it's determined, if it's no, then my account's permanently deleted and there's no other appeal method. And if it's reinstated, I guess it's fine. I've had this account since I was a freshman in high school, so 16 years, about half my life, maybe a little bit more. I've never had a post taken down. I've never had a ban, especially in like the past like 5 or 6 years. I've really used Twitter more and more often, and don't talk to people very much on the actual Facebook platform, maybe in groups. I did have a foreign policy focus group, the name of the old show, and then I do have a conflicts of interest page there. And then I mainly used it for messengers because, there's a lot of great people on Facebook who only use Messenger, or just, family, friends stuff. I have family send me updates on their kids and stuff through Facebook. And so, and then it is kind of a bummer because I do lose one of the contact methods I had with some old high school friends and things like that, and also pictures from high school that apparently are now going to be deleted, and I have like no ability to download. So probably made a mistake there, not going ahead and doing that, and just maybe a lesson for every one of the listeners. If you got pictures on Facebook, I wouldn't count them safe to store them there, because if they take your account down, you just don't have access to that stuff anymore. So one of the reasons I want to talk about this straight off the top is because I have to make a change, even if they reinstate the Facebook account. I think it's safe to say that that account isn't safe, that platform isn't safe, and I am going to look at an alternative to spend more time on rather than Facebook, and then maybe a different messenger to use for fans of the show who would like to get in contact with me. So if people have preferences or anything, please let me know, and I definitely want to decide based on where the fans of the show are. That way we're going to have the most reach on whatever new platform that I want to focus some attention to. But I will continue to use Twitter. But I think this is more expansive, and it's not just about Kyle Anzalone here, and I'm not that important. Although I will mention the first article that I'm talking about today on the authorization for use of military force was picked up by Zero Hedge and had about 150,000 views the day before I was banned from Facebook. And so I do wonder if that potentially had made the decision on my account, or something like that. Maybe that got me flagged or noticed. But yeah, so I think we do need to look towards alternatives. And it's bigger. Consortium News, Mint Press News, Alan McLeod, and then I haven't seen the particular person tweet this out, but Geopolitics and Empire, and I actually went on the host show on TNT Radio a week or so ago. Very nice, Hervoya Mojek, and he's also been banned from PayPal, and so in the consortium news case, they had a little bit of money in that account they reported, and that is been seized by PayPal, and they say, hey, maybe you'll get this back in 180 days when we make a determination, but maybe we'll just keep it. And we're talking about $10,000. I mean, for an outlet the size of consortium news, that's not just, I'm sure it's not going to break the bank or anything like that. That consortium, runs a good and stable operation. That's why you should donate and support them. But at the same time, that is not an insignificant amount of money, and it may make it more difficult to operate. So you definitely want to head over. I know they're having a fundraiser right now. And then, of course, for people who have their recurring donations set up on PayPal, that means that us in the independent media need a new source. I very much think that this has a lot to do with the war in Ukraine. I mean, who knows the reason I was taken off of Facebook? If I'm given a reason, I certainly will bring that forward just to clarify, whatever it was. I can't imagine it's anything that was recently posted either on my page or on the channel, but I suppose we probably won't even find out, and they're just going to tell me that, they reviewed it. I did violate the community standards, and that, that was that. And so, I should mention too, the future of the conflicts of interest Facebook page, I don't know. I'm guess going to try to find out some way to set it up to auto post and then do nothing else. I don't think it could really be managed with the host of the show that we have. I'm removed. Will is regularly banned from Facebook, and then Connor doesn't have Facebook. So with that being the status, it's going to be very hard to actively manage the page there and interact with the audience. So I'll just have it set up to where the show will auto post. So if anybody really determines that they want to see the show on Facebook, we'll get it up there. But other than that, it probably won't be able to continue. And again, look for new payment transmission methods. And so, all right, I think that's enough talk on the censorship. Although if it gets worse, I do want to continue to mention this because it is very important. But I gotta talk about the actual news that's likely the cause of Facebook banning my account. And so again, this article from antiwar.com, and then it was reprinted again at Zero Hedge with nearly 150,000 views. House Republicans introduced bill to give Biden sweeping authorities to wage war in Ukraine. On Sunday, Congressman Adam Kinzinger announced a new authorization for the use of military force. If passed, the AUMF will allow President Biden to deploy troops to defend Ukraine if Russia uses chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. The congressman issued a press release saying the legislation would establish important red lines, echoed Biden's plea that Putin must be stopped. And this is reading the press release. I'm introducing this AUMF as a clear red line so the administration can take appropriate action should Russia use chemical, biologic, and or nuclear weapons. We must stand up for humanity. We must stand with our allies. As the President of the United States has said, Putin must be stopped. Accordingly, the commander-in-chief to the world's greatest military should have the authority to make the necessary actions to do so. And so there, he really is saying that this bill is about stopping Putin. And, he's going to go on to say, well, I don't think this should be used right now. But he is saying that I am giving the president the ability to do what he wants, and that's to stop Putin. Now, the bill is titled to authorize the use of United States armed forces to defend the territorial integrity of United States allies. And it will allow the president to determine if WMDs have been used. The AUMF terminates once the president certifies that the territorial integrity of Ukraine has been restored. Now, there's a lot in here to break down. The most problematic aspect, of course, is that this is giving the president a blank check to wage war. The bill does not include any oversight built in by Congress, and on particularly the determination that weapons of mass destruction have been used or a sunset date. And so, this is the exact follies and mistakes that were outlined with the congressional authorization for uses of force in 2001 and 2002, of course, intending to authorize the war in Afghanistan and then Iraq, but it really authorizing numerous military interventions from Morocco to the Philippines, a massive section of the world killing people and arming different militaries and things like that. It's all been packed into those two very short pieces of legislation, and this legislation makes the exact same errors. Now, another issue with it, of course, is that the bill is the title is wrong. Ukraine isn't a treaty ally of the United States. They are specifically not. They are not a NATO ally. Joe Biden has made this very clear. That's why we're not defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine right now. And so this is just very foolish, or I guess you could say propagandistic of Kinzinger to title his bill this way. Now, then he announced the bill on Meet the Press with Margaret Brennan, telling her, "I don't think we need to be using force in Ukraine right now. I just introduced an AUMF giving the president basically congressional leverage for the permission to use it if WNBs are used in Ukraine." And so I compared this in my article with something that Joe Biden said as a senator in 2002, kind of justifying his explanation for voting for that authorization for use of military force in the Iraq War. He says, "I will vote for this because we should be compelling Iraq to make good on its obligations to the United Nations, which involved getting rid of its weapons of mass destruction. Approving this resolution does not mean military action is imminent or unavoidable." And so I think that this bill, much like the 2002 authorization for use of military force, is a rubber stamp for Joe Biden to wage war in Ukraine against Russia. And this is, the framing of this, just like Joe Biden is trying to mislead the American public, cover their tracks a little bit and say, "Oh, I'm not pro-war. I just want the president to have the ability to do what he needs to do," but really is giving a blank check to war. Now, we've seen the problems with the chemical weapons red lines in Syria, of course. What chemical weapons actually are. Look, of course, using sarin gas or something like that is absolutely horrific. And I'm not saying that it's okay to even use chlorine gas or tear gas or white phosphorus. I'm anti-war. I'm opposed to all these weapons being used. But understand, if you're giving the president, and that, initially now means President Joe Biden, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Joe Biden's going to be even president for another month. And so you could be giving Kamala Harris the authority to make this determination. Or who knows who's going to get elected in 3 years. And look, if this war really stretches on for years, as the Biden administration is estimating, you could really be giving Donald Trump the sole authority to determine if the United States is going to war against Russia and Ukraine. With this legislation. And so and just point out that again, chemical weapons could be stretched to mean tear gas, white phosphorus, and while these weapons are problematic, it's not anywhere near in the same category as using a nuclear weapon, annihilating a bunch of people. And biological weaponry could even be, I think, stretched quite a bit to mean something, as vague as like this is hurting the COVID situation in Ukraine. Now, I guess another couple points worth mentioning here is that I initially read this and didn't think that it would go anywhere. Kinzinger, of course, is on his way out. He's been redistricted out of a seat. I guess anything is possible. That's not saying for sure that he's not going to be a congressman next year, but I think it's pretty unlikely at this point that will be the case. And so, with that, that's a reason that this particular piece of legislation sponsored by him isn't that significant. And so, it could be that the congressman is really kind of out on an island by himself. I haven't seen this co-sponsored in the Senate, but my concern is that this isn't going to get voted on right away, and it's going to linger for a few weeks or a few months, and then there's going to be not even proven allegations, but just allegations of Russia considering using or potentially using these weapons. And that will manifest in that the Huts will use this and say, well, if you want to make sure that Russia isn't going to use chemical weapons, what you really need to do is pass this AUMF. And that's how it's going to end up getting on the books sometime this summer. So I think we need to be actively opposed to this. And of course, I don't know how the hell to stop something like this. The propaganda is so thick right now, but yeah, this is a huge concern. Now, I have a new article out at the Libertarian Institute with Will Porter. U.S. launches 2 sets of military exercises in Europe. The United States and its Western partners have earmarked on 2 simultaneous rounds of war games in Eastern Europe as Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its 3rd month. Swift Response 2022, an annual drill hosted by the U.S. Army's Europe and Africa Component Command, kicked off on Monday and is set to run until May 20th. It will be carried out across locations in the high Arctic, the Baltics, the Balkans, and elsewhere in Eastern Europe. The Army said in a statement. Around 9,000 sailors, among them 2,700 Americans and 3,600 troops from 16 allied nations, will take part in the exercises. In addition to training for Arctic defense operations, the servicemen will simulate joint airborne joint forcible entries in Latvia, Lithuania, and North Macedonia. Poland, meanwhile, announced the start of Defender Europe 2022 military drills on Sunday, noting that it would take place May 1st through 27th in 9 countries that will involve 18,000 soldiers from more than 20 nations. And the statement from Warsaw said, the troops' ability to cooperate in a joint combat operation will be put to the test using various training episodes, including long-distance tactical marches, bridging rivers, and live fire training. This year's Defender Europe will be scaled back to compare to prior iterations as more than 30,000 soldiers from 27 nations participated in drills in 2021. The previous year involved more troops and was reportedly one of the largest military exercises held on the continent since the end of the Cold War. Though Russia has repeatedly denounced such war games as aggressive posturing, which simulate offensive military action, Poland claimed Defender Europe exercise demonstrate the United States' unshakable commitment to NATO, touting it as a prime example of our collective capabilities. And so, 2 real things I want to point out here. The U.S. and our Western partners always bill war games as, these are important and they're not offensive or provocative in any way. When in reality, I think these war games are extremely provocative. And if you look at how every country reacts, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, they're strongly against the U.S. carrying out these military operations near their borders. And it's, of course, because the U.S. is a massive nuclear war power that's conducted offensive warfare in the past. And these countries worry that the U.S. drills are sometimes drills, but one time could be an actual attack. And if the U.S. crossed into Iranian airspace and carried out a couple airstrikes, what could Iran really do other than enter into a war with America that would ultimately see their entire country destroyed? And so that's why these war games are so troublesome. I mean, in North Korea, they are lined up with the planting and harvesting season, forcing more of the North Korean military to be deployed during times they could be otherwise planting and being farmers and producing food and things, or other whatever else the North Korean economy allows their civilians to do. So, I guess, it is worth knowing that these war games are scaled back a little bit from last year. They were extremely provocative and upsetting to Russia. Now, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the United States has delayed and then I believe overall canceled a test of an intercontinental ballistic missile, which was good to see. And so there's at least some mindfulness in the Biden administration that these things are somewhat provocative and upsetting towards Russia. However, by and large, these are supported and just extremely wasteful, unnecessary. They do them every year. And like Poland says, I think a lot of it has more to do with, just supporting the military industrial complex in NATO. This is very expensive. And I'm sure for maybe some of the local economy, like bringing in the thousands of troops, all the support equipment and everything that comes with them, maybe they pick up a little bit of extra like tourist economy money. But then also it's just good propaganda for the Eastern European countries to have all the NATO forces in their country. But it really doesn't do anything to prepare, I don't think, for the potential invasion, especially not since they carry them out every single year, often doing the same things. Let's see. Oh, I have another article from antiwar.com. Washington, Kiev contract with private sector spy firms to target Moscow's forces. The Wall Street Journal reports the U.S., Ukraine, and its allies are paying companies with spy satellites to collect intelligence on Russian troop movements. Western countries have worked with several firms to manage hundreds of satellite making passes over Ukraine each day. While the satellites have different abilities, some can scan the entire country daily with a 9-foot resolution. Other companies collect intelligence through clouds and at night. Hawkeye 360's fleet of satellites can actively follow Russian troop movements. John Serafani, the firm's CEO, said that it has been following Russian forces using GPS jamming equipment. Matsar Technologies is contracting with various media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal. The firm provides journalists with images of a broad range of Ukraine with a 12-inch resolution. Officials have recently discussed giving Kiev more detailed intelligence as the battle moves to Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. The U.S. claims that it has assisted Ukrainian military in downing a Russian troop transport, killing hundreds. Senior national security officials told the outlet that the more affordable space-based technology is making it more difficult for Russia to hide its troop placements. Officials also noted it was easier for the White House to declassify intelligence because that data collected from private firms is public information. And I can imagine if these countries were, say, producing any kind of imaging that the White House saw detrimental to Ukraine, of course, then it would be censored. But since it's detrimental to Russia, then we're going to declassify it. And you also have to wonder if this is maybe providing the Biden administration with the ability to declassify intelligence, as they said that they have very low confidence of. This was reported in NBC News by Ken Delinian, that they're declassifying intelligence that they have very low confidence of to, just put it out there to the American people. Maybe this is kind of aiding in that government propaganda effort. Next article from Dave DeCamp, and I mentioned Nancy Pelosi's visit on the show on Sunday, but Dave had some statements that she made now that, she's out of Ukraine. After Ukraine visit, Nancy Pelosi says Russia's war warrants the strongest possible military response. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Monday that Russia's invasion of Ukraine warrants the strongest possible military response, and the U.S. shouldn't be deterred by warnings from Russia. Pelosi made the comments from Poland a day after a trip to Ukraine, where she met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The House Speaker received a warm reception from Zelensky, who presented her with the Order of Princess Olga, a Ukrainian civil decoration presented to women who made contributions to the Ukrainian state. On Monday, Pelosi held a meeting with Polish President Duda in Warsaw to discuss the U.S. and NATO's increasing support for Ukraine. Poland has emerged as one of Ukraine's strongest supporters, Poland has emerged as one of Europe's strongest supporters of Ukraine and recently sent over 200 Soviet-designed T-72 tanks to the Ukrainians in an escalation of NATO military aid. On top of the military response, Pelosi said the strongest sanctions are necessary to make the case that Russia's war was not tolerable. We shouldn't be doing anything less because the threat from Russia. The U.S. military response to the war has involved pouring weapons into Ukraine, providing Ukrainians with intelligence to target Russian troops, and training Ukrainian forces on how to use U.S. weapons. President Biden has repeatedly ruled out sending troops to Ukraine to fight Russia directly over the risk of starting World War III. But despite the risks, Ultra Hawk in Washington are eyeing ways to get the U.S. directly involved. And Dave points out here the Adam Kinzinger AUMF. And, Pelosi's statements don't sound like she's too far off from supporting something like Kinzinger's bill. Another interesting development here that Dave DeCamp writes up, Russian lawmakers say Moscow should respond in kind to U.S. asset seizures. The chairman of Russia's State Duma said Sunday that Russia should confiscate property owned by Westerners in a response to President Biden's plan to transfer seized assets, Russian assets, to Ukraine. Last week, President Biden asked Congress to craft legislation that would give him the power to use the frozen assets of Russian billionaires as funding for Ukraine. The head of the State Duma called the plan simple theft and said Moscow should respond in kind. And, one of the disturbing things about this is it really has just been a war on seizing Russians' assets, right? These are just people. And look, these are rich business owners who likely got their money through corruption and have stolen a lot of wealth from the Russian people. And so, in a sense, I don't have a ton of sympathy here. I do understand that perspective. But at the same time, they are just stealing this money because these people are Russians. It's not because, at least, in some cases they are supportive of the war effort. In many cases, they are not. There's people that have been directly opposed to the war effort and sanctioned anyways. And so, it really isn't about the war. It's just about stealing the wealth and the assets of Russians. And this is more in line with the overall policy from Washington has been towards Russia since at least 2014. The plan has been to weaken Russia in the fear that one day the U.S. would have to compete with Russia, that it would become enough of an economic power once again, like China, to compete with the U.S. And so, to not have to deal with that, the U.S. has embarked on a campaign to weaken Russia, and we did this by, trying to take out Assad in Syria and then arming the rebels, even though they were ISIS and Al Qaeda, and the same thing in Ukraine by arming up the Ukrainian military and making them more and more closer to NATO partners, and to the point where in September they're essentially a de facto NATO partner in the alliance. Ukraine is that they provoke Russia to invasion because they violated so many core Russian security concerns, and this is the U.S. plan to overstretch Russia and make sure they never become a competitor to the United States again. So, I do think that is a part of the Russian plan. Now, I also want to mention here that I read an interesting article on NBC News where a woman outlines how she's grateful that she gave her children with her husband is a Russian, her partner is a Russian, but she elected to give her children her name rather than her husband's name. And, she always had felt kind of tentative about it. But the racism towards Russians in the United States recently is to the point where she understands it, and she's grateful that, they don't have to live as obviously with that burden, but also very disturbing that, a part of your children's heritage is, of course, so demonized by the public that they have to downplay. It's a very disgusting point that the American culture has come to, and something that really needs to be called out and talked about, that, we have developed this level of anti-Russian sentiment. I mean, they're banning Russians from competing in the Boston Marathon, not Russians who have like avowed support for Putin and the war effort, not Russians who are a part of the government or in the military, or who in some way, are, it's one thing if it's an upper level member of the Russian government or something like that, or even then, I would be tentative about banning people just, based on the actions of, the actual government. But, just because diplomacy could be disrupted with the bans. But, if you're going to ban people who are supportive of the war effort, a part of the government, that's one thing. But, these bans are targeting Russians overall. And it's just absolutely disgusting. I really still continue to feel like I haven't seen anything like this in the U.S. Since 9/11. All right, let's move on now to another article from myself and Will Porter, published yesterday at the Libertarian Institute. U.S. declares support for Venezuelan regime change effort. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington would continue to back Juan Guaido's claim to power in Venezuela. The statement came just weeks after the White House held talks with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Blinken reiterated U.S. support for Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela during a call with the opposition leader on Monday. The State Department said, adding that he urged for peaceful restoration of democracy in Venezuela and free and fair elections, even though there have been monitored elections in Venezuela since Guaido claimed power that affirmed the democracy's whatever the hell will, a vote was held in a free election means in Venezuela, and Maduro won. And yet the U.S. is still calling for free and fair elections. Our article continues, though. The U.S. first recognized Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate head of state in 2019 after the Donald Trump administration severed formal diplomatic ties with the government in Caracas. However, even with ample American support and a maximum pressure campaign waged against Maduro, Guaido was unable to achieve much influence in the country. A coup attempt organized by Guaido and fellow opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez in 2019, moreover, fizzled after little more than a day, failing to trigger mass protest defections, and then Maduro actually turned out bigger protests. Trump placed heavy sanctions on Venezuela while in office, helping to cripple its economy alongside ruinous policies imposed by Maduro's socialist government. In the first year of Biden's term, the White House did little to alter that approach, retaining belligerent measures crafted by hawkish Trump staffers John Bolton and Elliott Abrams, who Elliott Abrams, by the way, is a convicted liar. With Washington seeking to end all energy imports from Russia in response to its attack on Ukraine, however, the government has increasingly turned to oil-rich Venezuela as alternative. In need of energy, the White House engaged in direct talks with Maduro in early March. The discussions netted the release of 2 American prisoners previously detained by Venezuelan authorities, though it's unclear whether any progress was made on the oil question. While Venezuela holds some of the world's largest oil reserves, it is currently only able to produce little over 600,000 barrels per day, a tiny fraction of Russia's 10 million plus, thanks in large part to American sanctions and a lack of foreign investors. Much of the country's oil exports now go to China, Cuba, and India, though sanctions relief could allow it to ramp up its shipping capacity. It remains to be seen whether the secretive talks with Maduro will result in rapprochement with his administration or even a narrower deal for oil. And while members of Guaido's team have condemned the discussions as foolish, saying to buy oil from Maduro is the same as to buy oil from Putin, Blinken's latest comments indicate that Washington is still all in for the Venezuelan opposition and will continue to bat their claim to power. And a part of my concern here is that if the U.S. hits a brick wall in negotiating with Maduro, they may still feel pressure to get access to more oil supply, and they could respond to this by, a greater push to back Guaido's claim to power. I do want to also mention that I read Venezuela was looking to increase its ability to ship oil, the amount of tankers and everything that it could ship out oil with. And so that indicates to me that there must have been some progress on talks, although that was over a month ago now. So it could be that this is fizzling out. Want to talk about Yemen for a minute. Couple important issues here. The first is that the ceasefire is apparently going fairly well. So this is fantastic news, maybe the best news out of Yemen in 7 years, this ceasefire. So want to mention that there's been weeks that have gone by without airstrikes, not a lot of attacks going on. If you want more details on what's happening on the ground, Sky Horton has a great interview out with Yemeni-based reporter Nasser Arabi, where he really lays out, the different areas of Yemen and what's going on. My understanding is, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of activity at the airport in Yemen's capital city yet. There's been trading claims onto why that's the case, but there has been some success in offloading some cargo in Hodeidah, which is Yemen's key port city. So a little bit of good news there. Now, there are still potential issues like the new coalition. So Mansour Hadi has been ousted as Yemen's president. He's been the Saudi-backed and internationally recognized president of Yemen since 2012, so 10 years. Hard to believe. Although since 2015, he has been based in Saudi Arabia, and it's largely speculated and pretty obvious that he's essentially acted at the behest of Saudi Arabia during that time, a Saudi sock puppet type leader. And so he's been removed from power, and there's been a coalition presidential council put in place by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Now, Nasser Arabi points out that one of the potential problems here is that this is essentially a coalition of anti-Houthi actors. It's the parties that have been at war against the Houthis all now have a presidential council put together and could almost solidify positions that prevent any kind of rapprochement with the Houthis. Now, there is a couple interesting stories dealing with the U.S.-Saudi relationship as it relates to Yemen. This from Jason Didson, antiwar.com. Prince, Saudis feel let down by U.S. amid strained ties. Fueling recent reports on tensions between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, high-ranking Prince Turki Al Faisal, the former intelligence chief, spoke to Saudi media telling them the kingdom feels let down by the U.S. over the lack of American actions on the Saudi security struggles. The security issues center around the Yemen war, which Saudi has been leading for the last 7 years. The recent escalations have seen cross-border attacks between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, as well as Yemen and the UAE. While the U.S. has made some effort to support the Saudis and the UAE, the more specific counsel is to speed up the end of the war. The Saudis appear to expect the U.S. to somehow shield them from this blowback, something the U.S. didn't and likely couldn't do. Just as Saudi Arabia became more aware of the lack of U.S. omnipotent presence, the U.S. Are raising tensions on other issues like the 2018 assassination of Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi kill team, and more recently trying to get Saudi Arabia to increase its production of Russian oil to supplant the U.S. sanctions on Russia and help to make up for that supply, which of course Saudi Arabia so far has been unwilling to do. So one more thing here that is also important, and that is apparently this isn't the biggest issue though. This again from Jason Ditz. Yemen's seen as only minor issue in the U.S.-Saudi split, and pointing out the Khashoggi and other things going on that lead to U.S.-Saudi issues. All right. Now I want to take a minute to talk about Syria. Don't have any real articles to go over here, but it's been about a month and a half since I mentioned Syria or real news on Syria on the show. So I want to point out that Israel has been keeping up, if not increasing, its pace of airstrikes in Syria. I highly suspect this is an attempt to provoke a reaction from Tehran in order to help give Israel ammunition to lobby the U.S. to end talks to revive the nuclear deal with Iran, but also Israel is taking every opportunity they can to weaken the Assad government, who they see as an enemy. And of course, Israel wants to annex the Golan Heights, which they stole from Syria several decades ago. There were two U.S. soldiers that were lightly injured, was the phrase used, in an attack on a base in eastern Syria. It's exactly unclear of who carried out that attack. I haven't seen much reporting on this, and it kind of didn't make major headlines as these attacks usually do. And then we also had Assad, the Syrian president, speaking and traveling to the UAE, or a UAE official traveling to Syria. I can't remember which one. But Assad met with the high-ranking UAE official, and this actually upset the U.S. Go figure. Diplomacy is the one thing that Washington doesn't want to see around the world. All right, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today, everyone. Again, if you have suggestions on what I should do about moving on from Facebook, please let me know. And appreciate all of your support, continued support. And if anything, follow me on Twitter. I really do enjoy using Twitter. I know it's not the greatest thing, and I'm not like all about the great Elon Musk is gonna save us from the free speech censorship or anything like that. It's 100% possible I could be kicked off of Twitter in the coming weeks too, but I do feel like I get pretty good interaction with the audience there. And again, some of the articles that I put out get hundreds of retweets on Twitter. So, we do get a lot of traction and action over there. And continue to support and share the show. Thanks, everybody.